Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this very, very special conversation with someone who's not just a friend, but with whom I connect through his books quite a bit. And he oftentimes says it as it is while trying to maintain what many would look at as balance. But his latest book, Soul and Sword, makes us think and also perhaps draw inferences and look back at the history of the origins of political Hinduism and its continuum. Is it a thought continuum? Has it been there within our systems for thousands of years, or should we just look back about 400-500 years and say, where is the inception? So let's talk to Hindol Sengupta and understand what made him write this. Hindol, good to speak with you. First up.
Lovely to talk to you.
So Soul and Sword, the title and the thought. Let's start from there.
Well, in political Hinduism, there's of course the soul part, because there's obviously, many of the thinkers that contributed to political Hinduism were people who had deep spiritual roots. I'm of course thinking at the moment of people like Vivekananda, people like Rishi Aurobindo and others. But even before that, even if you look at the word Hindutva, for instance, it first appears in Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's Ananda Math. Ananda Math, of course, is the book that gives us Vande Mataram. Yeah. Now, what is Ananda Math about? It is about these warrior monks, fighting from forests. So the soul part of it is irretrievably connected to the sword part of it in the history of political Hinduism. I mean, think about Shivaji Maharaj, right? Shivaji Maharaj, many would argue, not only a great warrior, but an extremely thoughtful, spiritual man, right? So this connection is very deep and has been continuing for a long time. So therefore, soul and sword.
No, but if you look at our own references, as far as our own vigrahas or deities are concerned, Mahavishnu has,
that's right.
The sword or the Sudarshan in one hand and the Padma or the lotus in the other, and the conch and the mace. So they go left and right. With Shiva is the same thing. So you have the Trishul and the Damru going hand in hand. But Hinduism, many would say, why use ism? Those who advocate, strong advocates of Hindutva or dharmic route of governance would say, why use isms?
So, I think that bit of debate is a very esoteric debate, and I think that will continue. But this book was not only published in India, but it's out around the world. It was published in America and so on and so forth. So I make it very clear in the very beginning of my book, in the first chapter, that I'm not talking about Hinduism, the religion, at all. I'm talking about political Hinduism. Every faith has political connotations, because after all, faiths exist among human beings in the world. Correct. If it didn't exist in the world, they wouldn't have to deal with the world and therefore politics. But at the end of the day, it exists in the world, so there's always going to be an interaction and a conversation with politics. And my book is about the conversation of Hinduism with politics and political Hinduism. It is not about the religion at all.
So do you go all the way far back as Kautilya to try and draw the inception and the origins, or further back?
Yeah.
Or do you want to look at say 1100 AD onwards?
So, as a historian, I make the argument that you will never be able to find an origin moment, so to speak. Because, some people will say, well, just because we mentioned Shivaji Maharaj, he was fighting not as a Hindu king, but just as a ruler. Some others would say, no, of course not. He said Hindavi Swarajya. He was definitely fighting as a Hindu king or a Hindu warrior. But there is no end to this argument. I actually use historical methodology to say this argument is futile. What we have to ask ourselves, which is what I do in the book, is the people who conceptualized political Hinduism, what was their self-narration? How were they looking at history? How were they looking at points of history? And that very clearly, as I mentioned in my book, their self-narration is very clearly from the beginning of the resistance to invasions to India. So I go back to the 1st century and so on and so forth, and I talk about various rulers and so on and so forth. Remember, I also mentioned in my book that we talk about the Ghaznavid and the Gauri invasions, but there is a 200-300 period in between where there are the invasions are stopped. Who stops those invasions? And they are all Hindu rulers. So all of these points of reference that embody the world of political Hinduism, I narrate into one timeline one trajectory to give us and the world a sense of what political Hinduism is. And this is all important because it connects to India's today.
Yeah.
Right? So these are not just esoteric things in history.
Correct. So let's come there, because there are those who want to derive a political influence from the geographical relevance of Hindu or Hind, because even in Arabic and Farsi we have references of Al-Hindi, so the land between the Indus and the ocean, and even Shankaracharya describes it. The other one is spiritual, way of life, inclusion. The third one, like you said, could be the military political origins. So is there an overlap between all of this?
There is. There is certainly an overlap, because you see, at the end of the day, if you look at the imagination of political Hinduism, that it derives itself from the land is impossible to escape, right? You know, this entire idea of a sacred geography. You know, of course, in India, everybody thinks Daya was the first person who came and talked about the sacred geography, but that's not true. People like Radha Kumud Mukherjee and others had been talking about sacred geography for far longer than Daya. And in fact, one could go back to the Puranas and say, you know, the sacred geography idea comes from there.
Yeah,
right?
Vishnu Purana is mentioned.
Of course, right? So this sacred geography is very important. That's why the defense of sacred geography is important. I mentioned in my book, why was Sardar Patel so, hell-bent on ensuring that Somnath is restored? At his dying bed, Sardar Patel gives that task to be completed, right? And says, you must complete this task, and so on and so forth. Why is it finally that, the first president defies Nehru to say that, no, I will, Rajendra Prasad says, I will go and inaugurate Somnath. It's because Somnath is an emblem. Somnath in the universe of political Hinduism is an emblem of our indigenous resistance. Right? And it's very important to note, and I mentioned this in the book, people think of political Hinduism only as a BJP thing.
Correct.
That's not correct. Actually, many people, I would think of, people like Patel and many others to have contributed in some ways to the overall thought process of political Hinduism. There were many people who were at that time part of the Congress. The Congress had all these sides, right? There was the left in the Congress, and then there was the conservatives in the Congress.
And then there was a Garam Dal in the Congress also.
All kinds of things, right? And the extreme left and so on and so forth. But the so-called sort of conservatives in the Congress actually were many people who contributed heavily to, the thinking process of political Hinduism. Think about Madan Mohan Malviya, for instance, and many others, right? And I mentioned that in the book. In fact, I mentioned in the book that if you read early Savarkar and early Nehru, and this, of course, would be blasphemous to many people. But if you read early Savarkar and early Nehru, their conceptions of the nation are nearly identical.
But did Sardar Patel, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee carry forward that thought continuum? And somewhere, Dr. Hedgewar and Veer Savarkar decided to go separate ways. Their thought process with the RSS, thought process with the Hindu Mahasabha was different. But did they align themselves in this concept of political Hinduism? You draw certain parallels. So
I think, the Congress was a very large umbrella, right? I think there were many places where there was a break. One place, of course, was in this idea that should the movement entirely be non-violent, an idea in which not only Gandhiji, but even Patel and others were strident that it has to be non-violent. Whereas many others derived inspiration from the revolutionary part of our history. Certainly Savarkar, who had spent all those years in Kalapani and so on and so forth, said that no, it doesn't always have to be non-violent. There was a break there also.
Subhash Babu also.
And Subhash Babu, of course, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and many others, right? But remember, even till Patel's time, there was a proposal that many people who are part of the RSS could also join the Congress.
But the Congress always, the narrative is that Patel banned RSS.
But Patel also lifted the ban on RSS, as I mentioned in my book. It is there in my Patel biography. It is there in this book also. Yes, it is true that Patel banned the RSS, but it is true that Patel also wrote to Nehru saying, I have examined all the files and so on and so forth, and there is no connection. There is only a connection with the Hindu Mahasabha, and he lifted the ban also. So it's a complex history. Remember, but this dual membership, which was open even in Patel's time, in JP's time, the same thing would come up too, as I mentioned in the book. Look at the continuum. You began this interview talking about the continuum. Here we see the continuum. That idea of dual membership comes up with JP's time too. That's why people like Vajpayee and others step out and say, no, we will not give up RSS roots. We will create a different party instead. And that's why the BJP. So remember, the BJP's, one of the BJP's founding articles even today talks about Gandhian socialism. That was just a phrase that was used commonly at that time, so it's there. But if you look a little deeply, what does it mean? Look, if you read Dattopant Hengdi and Upadhyay and all these people, they are very clear that India existed for all these years and was able to maintain its society even with all the invasions and conquests and all of that because it had certain inherent attributes. And those attributes, they say, come from India's own spiritual understanding of two things. Time being cyclical.
Yeah.
Unlike in the West, time is linear. So your karma will always catch up with you. Your excess, you cheat somebody, you go into crazy conspicuous consumption, all of this will come back to you one day. That's one. The second thing that they're always talking about is balance. The other great Hindu idea, that everything must have a santulan, as they say in Hindi. There must be a balance, right? That's why Dattopant Hengdi is saying communism is one extreme, capitalism is one extreme. There must be India shows the middle path. And we're seeing this today in the world. Argentina is one extreme, right? China is another extreme, right? And in a sense, India is the middle path.
Would you believe that currently, the current day Hinduism or political Hinduism, I'm using your term, does that reflect what the thought process was? Is there a balance between perhaps extreme concepts, either ways, to perhaps a more liberal going forward? So
I think
let's talk about the current and then we'll discuss the age of Ram.
No, sure. Political Hinduism by its very nature is a liberal concept. Now, and many people will get angry if I say that, right? Because people like all these borrowed terms from the West. It is a liberal concept because many of the people who thought about it first, Bonkim, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, if you genuinely read their philosophies, they are world embracing. Not one of them is, world rejecting. You read Aurobindo, you read Vivekananda, right? You read Bonkim. They are all entirely world embracing. So it's liberal by its very nature. There is only one thing that political Hinduism has, which is extra. It has a sense of shatrubodh. What is shatrubodh?
Know your enemy.
A clear understanding that this is my enemy.
There is also this whole concept of how this shatrubodh, this concept of political Hinduism, is this inclusive, liberal, or is it exclusive? Does it exclude non-Hindus? Where do Christians fit in it? Where do Muslims fit in it? And you quote an interview that Khushwant Singh had with MS Golwalkar. So let's talk about that. So there is clarity there too?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's always been clarity in the world of political Hinduism that India is for all Indians who live in India. All Indians who live in India have this cultural heritage that belongs to everybody. Some people may want to reject it. That's an entirely different story. But that's their problem, not the problem of the rest of Indians who embrace it. And there should not be any, issue about this at all. Please remember, even the Ram temple that is being built, the Supreme Court itself allocated even greater land for the restoration and building of a mosque in the same town, right? So there has always been a very clear understanding that a common cultural heritage is available for every Indian, and every Indian who is part of our country is part of it, right? And I don't see why this is a debate at all, Anand. Allow me just 30 seconds. Think about it. In America, can a single president become president without clearly stating that they are Christian? No. Would you say America is
Vivek Ramaswamy is being asked the question.
That's right. So, but is America a liberal country? Does anyone say that? No. Everybody is living there. Hindus are, the world's biggest Hindu temple is being built there, right? India, similarly, India, no matter its Hindu cultural ethos or roots, has Asia's biggest church in Nagaland. Right? So I am just saying that why is this a debate only in India but not in any other country? It's not a debate in any other country.
No, because we've never insisted on
have not.
our leaders, president, prime minister, or whoever,
Yes.
to be necessarily Hindu. We've never argued that, made that argument. Neither does our constitution
Yes.
stipulate that compared to the others. But why is it that we are looked as and especially under the current leadership that advocates political Hinduism, as intolerant, as
Yeah.
illiberal?
Yeah.
Where does that perception come from? Kadyani is here.
Yeah.
Right.
No, this conception has, I think,
This whole thing about Khalistan. Look at the Khalistan narrative. Canada, trouble is Khalistan.
Yeah.
That itself is bumkum.
Yeah.
So,
no, I think see these things are in the realm of political polemics, so to speak. People say all kinds.
even
of
the
things.
map is so distorted. It's not
the map is distorted, and people keep doing this for mischievous intent and so on and so forth. I would stick as a historian to the broader concepts and the deeper issues. And I think in that I'm very clear. The age of Ram is essentially, which is the name of the last chapter of my book, the age of Ram is fundamentally a liberal age. Maryada Purushottam Ram is a fundamentally principled entity, so to speak.
So, but liberal, not where Hindus are apologetic about being
No,
Hindu.
there is
liberal
there is
where
no.
you have
cannot,
a clear concept of what is India and what
there
is
when the
which
Sarayu
shatrubodh.
river fills with 1 million lambs, there is nothing apologetic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
So the age of apologia is gone. I think we should no longer discuss even the idea of apologia. That is gone. The age of Ram is to entirely embrace your cultural heritage, celebrate it, at the same time ensuring that everybody feels included. Some people will mischievously